Thank you.
Okay, we call this work session to order. And I see we have full house, we're gonna definitely have a quorum. And would you like to make a motion to adopt the agenda?
I move that we adopt the agenda as presented. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. I guess I
It's
don't
so
see a
hard to
seat.
write. I feel like I'm like.
He is not present today.
What-
Okay, visitor communication.
Awful.
Let's see this one, so no reason to do that.
Anybody
Text it by
online?
me.
Sure.
Do you know how to do
Anybody
this
online,
other
Carol?
stuff? Pardon me?
Hello?
Is there any-
Oh, sorry. Oh, gosh.
Provide some comment?
Nope, nobody's here.
Right here,
Mhm.
No.
but no.
Nope, nobody's here.
Okay. And we have no minutes to approve.
Nope.
So we'll go right into the workshop. And discussion and review of 2025-26 district development code amendment. Both recently approved and anticipated upcoming amendments. No formal action will be taken. This is a work session.
Okay, Scott, thank you, Chair. So I just want to acknowledge that we have attendance, playing for, in case you're wondering,
Mhm.
this person that was in there. We haven't made a hire for a new planner yet, but we've heard, moved out here. First, he said, from back, and go somewhere and we got the river and talking for them. So we're trying to figure out what the extent planners do and if they want to come on. We want to ask you your thoughts on that. Hopefully, our they're due off to the concept. So, also joined here with Principal Planner Matt Martin. We'll kind of double team this presentation today, and it's really meant to be kind of a free flow discussion. So feel free to ask questions anytime. It might be a natural breaking point after Matt does his portion, which is the portion of looking back at some of the more recent development code amendments to give you an update on what's transpired since you recommended your approval. So sometimes things evolve a little bit after you recommend approval, and you don't always hear what happened at council. So I think it's an opportunity to update you with that. And then also to look forward to code amendments that we know that we will be undertaking. And go through a little bit of discussion about that. And also look to your feedback in terms of things that have been bothering you with the code, or things that you would recommend that we take a look at, things that you would recommend that we pass on to council for consideration. Oftentimes we take our direction from council, and council goals is the major driver of what development code is going through the process, but sometimes that is the result of discussion over a period of time. Some of these things percolate from staff, some of them percolate from the public, sometimes they can percolate from the planning. So it's a good opportunity for you guys to do us with, but you can pass it on to council, so maybe it's a council next week. And also just talk about sometimes there's things that come up that we don't know about. Just come up out of necessity. Sometimes it's something that's initiated by the applicant. Some of you remember a couple years ago, the tourist commercial zone fundamentals were result of an applicant issue application. So there are some that may be out there that we just don't know are coming through the pipe. But what we wanted to start with, as I mentioned, was to have Matt page you through three specific covenants that have come through. Well, one's come through recently, and we've been discussion on the other, and the other one you heard a moment about something about the third one. So, Matt, go ahead.
Scott. Evening, afternoon, commissioners. So here's a look back. You may all remember our time with the Pencil Space Standards adoption for the District Development Code. We carried those forward to the City Council shortly after your public hearing in March. your recommendation to adopt as drafted. Brought those to city council early April for public hearing, but noting that they didn't complete the adoption process until May 28th. So they really, public hearing itself was short and not very lively, but it was the deliberations. They really drilled down and had some special interest in refining the proposal, the actual standards. So it was not a discredit or a not good with the planning commission's process was made, but I think they took a special interest and really wanted to refine it and use additional or new information that they had to make the standards a bit more stringent and comprehensive than what we had before. Their process was not only the adoption of the development standards, but a separate adoption of the resolution for the prohibition plan list that we did share and discuss, but wasn't part of the planning commission's decision making or recommendation process. So today's staff report does include the adopted language from the ordinance for your reference. But just wanted to highlight what I identified as the strongest changes that they made. Again, it was filled with refinement and restructuring and clarifying language, but out of that, I think, the ones that I summarized here on the slide are most prominent. But think about applicability. What was before you was that it would be applicable to all new buildings or additions, including decks that exceed 200 square feet in area, would be subject to the defensible space standards. They pulled back from that and applied it only to new buildings and not additions in excess of 200 square feet. I think there were 2 points that they raised. Was with the additions, one that there wouldn't be the necessarily the desired effect of applying the defensible space to only a portion of the structure and not the existing portion, which would be how it was applied. So its effectiveness may be limited, and also you have an existing built environment, but there may be existing mature and invested landscaping and gardens that they didn't want to disrupt at that time. But also there is a continued interest in looking to apply the defensible space standards to existing built environments, existing developed sites, and looking to use that mechanism to apply to additions to existing structures. So there's more to come on that one, but as it stands, this would only be applicable to new builds, new construction. And from our standpoint, I think that's a little bit more streamlined to apply because we're looking at site plan reviews or new developments rather than applying it to built environments. The second is the type of vegetation. As noted and discussed, was the prohibited flammable plant list. They did make some tweaks to the type of grasses that are included on the flammable plant list, but they did have some trepidation on applying a prohibition to all pine trees, given that we have it's a prominent species we have in town, a treasured species that we look to save throughout. So they pulled back from that and provided an exception for preservation of ponderosa pine trees and large trees, so that they can be retained, recognizing that upon maturity, ponderosa as well as a pine, you have a high flammability, but they are adaptive, and as they mature, that bark is of a condition that it is resilient. It doesn't burn as significantly as other pine trees may. And then lastly, the defensible space area standards themselves. And this is where they really restructured it. Now, while the code doesn't specifically outline the immediate, the intermediate, and the extended zones, that first initial 5 feet, the 5 feet to 30 feet, and 30 feet and beyond. That's really was the concept they were getting at. And that first image that I had, if you go back to things. This graphic represents those 3 areas. And so with the changes they provided there, most significantly was Planning Commission's recommendation, or based on the original proposal, was to allow some vegetation within that initial immediate 5-foot area. The council said, no, let's pull back from that and not allow any vegetation within the initial are some exceptions for those significant trees, or special circumstances that can be approved under exception, but we're looking for a non-combustible, essentially hardscape within that initial 5 feet condition zone. And then from the 5 to 30 feet, I think that substantial change is the original proposal did allow for retention of existing flammable species that were on the list. Council wanted to pull back from that and say, no, let's remove that. Even the existing circumstance and not allowed within the 30 feet. Another extension is also no combustibles within the additional 30 feet as well. So that's any other combustible materials from bark mulch to ghost trees or decorative combustible material that's within that area. So
What about the propane thing? Would that not be considered combustible?
that in this circumstance, no, we're not looking at that as a combustible material. This is where we're looking at vegetation and then wood or natural materials.
Right.
There was a lot of discussion about propane tanks, but recognizing that, sure, they would be beneficial to be farther away from structures, but there's practical challenges of smaller lots, and recognizing that there is a, while not fail-proof, there are mechanisms that can reduce the risk of propane tank failure.
No flammable material looking.
That risk is removed, right? Because you don't have the vegetation under it or around. So, and then, but I think those were the prominent components. I think it came to after multiple deliberation sessions. I think they came to a good product that has been acknowledged and I don't want to say celebrated, but I will say celebrated by others, communities, and fire professionals, and I've had contact with other communities that have inquired about our process and our standards and looking to mirror it or look at it as a model. So I think that we're heading in the right direction there.
This goes into effect May 28th for all new build.
It went into effect 30 days after May 28th, so the end of June.
And then things in the pipeline before then, they're not subject, they've been.
Correct. So that's our own goalpost rule. So we don't want to change, we can't change the standards for anything that was already in process.
I had a comment on the general process. I think it's great. I love that we're being an industry leader in doing this. I think it would also probably behoove the city to offer some training to developers or something. To help them navigate that, because it is kind of a big change. I don't know if that's appropriate, but an idea.
If it turned into landscape, you think it's the right, we could get comments stuff.
Yeah, so it'd be a component of the application
No,
material.
I get it, but training for, look, we've outlawed these plants are more accessible, instead of down screen on time to go over research and stuff like that. These are best practices, or these are, because it is kind of a big change.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Plants next to your house and most I'm wondering, things like that, I'm just thinking from a developer homeowner standpoint. Sure. That makes sense. Could be a community outreach thing.
I'm a little concerned, well, not concerned, but we're looking at, with urban growth around here, I think one of the answers is higher density. When we do these cottages like just down the street here and everything, and if the 5-foot blanket around every structure end up with like a cement block with these cottages in there, I mean, it's just not too attractive. So, balancing.
It's a departure from our traditional landscaping standards. We would have bark mulch and arborvitae right up against buildings.
Right, that's absolutely should happen. I'm just kind of concerned with some of the cottages, because it's higher density. There may not, it just might be just a fair lot with.
Different colored rocks or anything.
Yeah, no.
It's a departure.
In the future, what is that gonna do over time? I don't like it happening here.
Better than having it burn down.
Well, yes.
Did the council take that into account at all? Aesthetics?
I think from be innovation and adaptation to what good new different landscaping practices are. So that'll certainly be some growth gains on how to provide that attractive environment, especially on small lots. Thinking about the cottage developments, they're going to be closer to those property lines, but in those environments.
So the insurance companies are gonna love this compared to the old typical landscaping and the way things are now with fire insurance.
And so that's a goal, is that applying these standards throughout the community, that we can perhaps inspire, or incentivize the insurance companies to serve our area. But I want to touch on cottage developments. There are required common areas that would be beyond those immediate zones. So that's where we're gonna have some of that redistribution of landscape to other areas that may not be right. So, then I do want to touch on Commissioner Drones question about implicating developers in the building community. With most projects, we have initial contacts before they even get to application stage, either those initial conversations or leading into pre-application meetings. So we have those steps along the way that we do have that interface to be able to share with those developers. And we've been throughout even before adoption, saying, so pay attention, these standards are coming. One other point,
Lots of things here. So we did get a comment, at least one comment, instead of public comment about concern about. This would preclude the ability to probably basically provide them to the small ones, and concerned about that. So there was some sentiment to that effect that brought into the hearing process, and maybe it was submitted during the application phase or not, but there's also the exception provision built into this that if you can come up with a scenario that would need the approval of the fire official, that there's potential for some variation of application of this.
Right.
One thought that came up was if you have using hardened local materials, and we may have a prohibited or a not prohibited plant place that maybe there's some scenario where we approve for some planting maybe a little bit closer within that area. That may be really fun.
Yes.
So there is that exception thing built into it, so that if there's a scenario that you don't with our division or someone comes up with a great plan, fire official, this relies a lot on the expertise of the fire official. Maybe there's a scenario where the can with some last within the certainly.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's a good segue that now we've
Just one last thing on that.
Sure.
My only concern about that whole thing was like equity. Like I said, you don't have as much property, you don't have as much space, you don't have the opportunity to put as nice things as somebody who has, 30 feet, but who has 30 feet of space in this town.
Yeah, but I kind of like honest, hey, let's put them in containers and put them on wheels and fire's coming off the wheel.
But yeah, I think it comes with with innovation and different techniques. That's so we're talking about the regulatory measures that are in the development code. That's not to say that these standards cannot be applied to the existing built environments. We've been contacted by multiple homeowners associations that are looking to either get Firewise certification or just provide a more hardened landscape. And so they're looking into these standards and applying those to their neighborhoods already. So it's ongoing, and then those educational opportunities in the city in collaboration with the fire district and other like-minded organizations are spreading the word of benefits of these standards and how to apply it. So ongoing efforts there. But as we noted, we touched on the landscape with regard to addressing wildfire impacts. Now we're looking at the built environment itself. So looking back at what's been adopted and looking forward to what our opportunities are that are maybe a combination of what we do with our municipal code, which does not interface with what you do, but maybe some changes to the development code later on. So I think we're all familiar with the statewide wildfire map that was under Senate Bill 762 that was intended to identify those plot standards for those properties that were designated high hazard areas. And in that would be the adoption of statewide defensible space standards and building hardening standards for new construction in those areas. However, you know that that map was controversial and ultimately repealed by the legislature and adopted by the governor this year under Senate Bill 83. So that mechanism to locally adopt those building hardening standards for residential construction, or what's referred to as R327, that opportunity was taken away because there was that relationship with the map itself. So under Senate Bill 83, the legislature recognized that there still would be some benefit to local communities and providing that an avenue for local decisions on where or how to apply those building hardening standards. So built into Senate Bill 83 is directed the building code division, state building code division, to adopt pathways and rules for adopting the R327 standards. Since the governor signed this late July, the building code division's been working on those rules, and just yesterday or earlier this week had published those temporary rules and providing that pathway for us as a city to consider adoption of that building code. So need to review and understand what those temporary rules require from a process standpoint, notice standpoint, and how it can be applied. But expecting that to be applicable to new buildings, new construction in the community, similar to our defensible space standards. So there's some consistency with how it would be applied. I jumped forward a bit too quickly. Go back to the image. This is from the Institute of Business and Home Safety Institute. It's one of their demonstrations, and clearly one's on fire, the other isn't. And you could see that or think that they just lit the one side on fire. But this is an ember shower demonstration. It's hard to pick up, but this is where they simulated a wildfire and high winds, and the embers are just blowing at these structures. So those embers themselves caught this non-hardened portion of the structure on fire. So what you do have on the other engulfed portion are those fire-resistant roofing materials, hardy plank or other fire-resistant siding, double pane, non-vinyl windows, and other measures that prevent or reduce the risk or impact of that wildfire. So that's what building hardening is versus all wood or combustible environment. So wanted to note that under R327, that only applies to residential construction, does not apply to commercial. So there's a gap, known gap in applying building hardening standards for those commercial environments. Now, under commercial construction, there are sprinkling and other building code standards that help protect the structure, the people with occupants within the structure, but not necessarily from the threat from the outside. So is that maybe the next push, maybe a regulatory standpoint at the state level to provide building hardening for commercial, perhaps, but we don't have that opportunity for building code here again. With that said, the council discussed and is interested in looking into opportunities that would interface with the planning commission in adopting design standards into the development code. So it may look and function a lot like what the building code says, but it'd be administered through our development code, and maybe not quite as technical as building code is written, but more from a menu of options of what those building materials and construction techniques may be. Again, requiring of higher class A roofing materials, the fire resistant siding, fire resistant windows, other materials, both soffits, other things like that, so that we can apply it through the development review process for the chief the same goal. So that may come with, I don't want to say controversy, but quite a conversation because it changes what the building practices would be and how they're applied. But again, that would be a change to our development code, something that comes to you guys. If that,
Is that residential and commercial you're talking?
so we would only apply this to only necessary through, for commercial construction because we have the avenue for adopting the building code through R 327
Yeah.
that address residential.
So you'd be ahead of the state.
If we were to go through this.
Alright.
So, but at the same rate, yeah, we want to make sure that we're collaborating, but we don't get too far ahead. And make sure that we don't get out of step with them. They're good graces, so to speak. But I expect if that moves forward, that there would be robust discussion with you guys through workshops. Probably multiple workshops because we've been thinking about so many different type of environments, built environments, types of construction. So we're to come on that.
Most likely, council will probably take this one piece, one step at a time. I'll probably go forward just with the adoption of R 327, see where things are at that point, and then maybe direct staff to pursue the design standards. Or maybe there's some different state to provide a process to adopt R 327 commercial as well. But kind of take it one step at a time and not try to bring it all at once. So.
And just a chance to acknowledge that, we have our 1880s Western Frontier Design theme in downtown. We did, through our historic landmarks commission and program, contract with a designer, provide some evaluation and recommendations on how to apply building hardening to our design theme. So we do have a toolkit or a playbook on how to craft some code and how it can be achieved in design theme. So there's some ground already.
When is that work gonna begin? For talking virtual or? I mean, you said what we're going to do, but Mike, when?
Haven't quite forecasted that.
Yeah.
I suppose this is that first conversation. I think we're good, as Scott noted, for taking these sequentially. I think our first step is to zero in on the adoption of R 327 for residential construction. But I can see us initiating this conversation this winter, so later this year. First part.
Seems like you could creep in from the outside through some of the different zones. Start requiring different zones that maybe are easier to apply some of these commercial hardening to and kind of get your feet wet a little bit before you tackle the downtown commercial Western theme thing.
A bit more, I don't want to say similar construction methods, but not as complex design needs.
And in my opinion, pretty critical to our survival of the downtown thing.
So on to floodplain, what we call now special flood hazard area. So before we move on, so we do have some floodplain in town associated with Whitejuice Creek, as on the image. It's a narrow band of floodplain, only area in town that's impacted and zoned floodplain, but nonetheless, something to be aware of and manage properly, in particular development within floodplain areas. There's a limited number of parcels, so that's a benefit to the community. And also, much of the development along the creek has been approved since what I'll call modern floodplain management practices, meaning that those developments were required to have upland areas for each one of the lots outside of the floodplain. So you're required, if you have upland area outside the floodplain adequate to build on, you shall. So we already have a prohibition on new development within the floodplain if you have adequate area. But there are those existing areas that structures or improvements are in the floodplain, and we need to consider that. But why we're bringing this forward, what is
No, I do not. That's only floodplains right there on like. Yeah. I think there's,
all this time and effort. Well, I can speak to it. So we have been directed by FEMA to adopt some additional standards to minimize or have no net loss of critical habitat for salmon in the region. That's as a result of a lawsuit from the Portland Audubon Society that sued the federal government and others, saying that the National Flood Insurance Program did not provide necessary protections to those endangered species of critical habitat. We happen to be, that's in Oregon or Region 10. We happen to be at the far reaches of those habitat areas, so we may not be seeing, at least currently, those salmon or other associated species up into Whitechoose Creek or beyond. But due to flow improvements and barrier reduction, they're coming. They're getting closer. So, well, but also what we do up here can impact habitat downstream.
And Whitechoose Creek is and the National Wild and Scenic Waterway Registry, so we have rules that we have to follow. It's going to protect the salmon, and that's why there's no man-made barriers now on Whitechoose.
So it's all part of those coordinated efforts. So that lawsuit was in 2009. Here we are in 2025, and implementation of these protections haven't taken place. And so through this process, and a result of the lawsuit was National Marine Fisheries Service did issue a biological opinion saying, yes, development within the floodplain can impact those habitats, and so confirming that you shall do so. FEMA has previously issued, what I'm looking at, but just to note that through these processes, FEMA issued some initial draft rules for implementation, and then the reason why I pushed was that follow up and now just acknowledging that this is a pattern of lawsuits to inspire or emphasize or get this project done. So in 2021, FEMA issued those draft rules. In 2023, environmental organizations said, you're not moving fast enough, so let's get this done. And so, so that then we'll get to the end there. So 2023, they judgment emphasized that you shall move more quickly in implementing the buyout. On to the next is that FEMA responded and prepared some implementation standards and opportunities to meet the intent and the requirements of the judgments. And that included 3 options for local communities to decide on. One, to flat out prohibit all development. Second, to adopt the model code that FEMA has and continues to refine for requirements for development in the floodplain. Or, as we've selected, is to review them on a permit by permit basis. Meaning, I recognize that, again, limited development pressure within our floodplain, and given that the conditions on each property may be unique and will be unique, the ways to address and provide no net loss of habitat can be tailored to that particular project, that properties. We're in a position to take action soon. However, have pending litigation as of 2025 by Oregonians for floodplain protection, saying that this process violates multiple laws from federal to state, state requirements for adoption and implementation of development code. So that litigation is ongoing. Parties have decided and agreed to discuss and work towards a solution. So instead of pursuing an adoption to date, we're monitoring that litigation and see where it lands. So that judgment or decision will influence our steps. The capacity and the structure of FEMA moving forward could influence our next steps. But you want to acknowledge that our code was approved or updated in 2016 with relatively modern standards. Again, prohibiting new development if you have upland areas. So there's a level of protection that we think we've got, have a pretty strong code now. And a relatively easy fix if that's needed to respond. So we're ready for that when it that happens.
So when you say floodplain, you're talking about the 100-year flood.
What's commonly referred to as the 100-year
Okay.
floodplain, right? Yeah.
And so for now, we're gonna stick with our standards.
Yeah.
As far as approving or not approving.
Yeah.
Building.
Yeah.
and Development.
Correct. And again, recognizing that, going back to the map, the limited floodplain that we have in the area. Not a big impact on this community or a number of properties, but you can see how important and controversial or significant this may be for other communities that have working waterways, working river fronts or bays, either on Columbia, Willamette, or Bronx Coast. So a really big deal for them.
Just thinking about as we expand our UPB, there may be more of a floodplain in Cleveland, so really. Kind of, especially with like master plan for that area, considering what floodplain that could come into the town look like and. How we wanna, that code that is prepared for the increase in floodplain in the city.
Absolutely.
It gives you an like Maddie referred to some of the more recent subdivisions, so it gives you an opportunity to design around floodplain. Whereas we have a lot more lots there that were platted probably before the floodplain was mapped. And so far you've got to come deal with existing conditions. This is an opportunity, gives you a blank slate to account for it and staff. Any other questions on the floodplain before we move on?
I'll just note that maintenance. Scott pulls up the slide there. This may have served as the workshop and for any updates to the special flood hazard area, because we may come in relatively hot with a public hearing just to get it on the books before any deadlines for adoption.
All right, well, thanks, Matt. It's good to look back, review what's happened, and let's look forward to really kind of that road here. Here's just kind of a list of known projects that we'll be taking through in the next say fiscal year or so. And many of these stem from council goals, and those council goals are 25, 26, the fiscal year, basically starting July 1st, going to end of June 26th. You know, we try to get these things done within that time period. It doesn't mean that some of these might not get kicked off till kick forward to the next fiscal year, just based on events. So let's start with residential design standards. The council goal here was begin process to update design standards in the community development code. And that was it's kind of a general statement. It covers a lot of ground there. I think that one of the reasons or impetuses for putting that goal into place was now that we've experienced some of these master plan developments that kind of come through, and we've seen somehow how they've developed out. There's been some observations amongst the council in terms of maybe some feedback they get from the community in terms of is our design standards strict enough to achieve what we want the community to do. Specifically when it relates to like repetition, having it's looking too similar next to each other.
Well, even worse yet, we're off 242.
We're not here to slam.
No, we're just we're talking, repetitive.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's multiple examples. Like I think we know that we're not going to get the variety anymore that we have in Old Town. It's just happened organically. We're getting more production builders, and so their efficiencies lie in making things look a little bit more similar. So our goal as a team is to try to get them to do a little bit more to different and make it look a little bit different, knowing that there's going to be a lot similar.
Yeah, like some of them have 5 designs and they already, every 5th house and. You go over to 8 home.
It's kind of a balance between, keeping character and, balancing affordability by there's a fine line in terms of how many restrictions they apply before we start to kind of get that scale a little bit. So, but is there more that we can do, or can we make some modifications to our existing standard probably without tipping that one? And so, that's one thing that we're going to be going forward. I didn't want to draw any specific project, but this is just kind of an example of some of the, maybe some of the reasons. We took a site visit with council. They love their overall development. I just wonder if there's some things that they could do that don't have a whole lot of cost to development to get a little more differentiation, even including just a little bit more distinguishment of color. That was something that we strove right to do with Sunset Meadows, was to get some differentiation. We can see, there's duplex units, so there's not a differentiation between the two units attached to each other, but between the ones, there's some differentiations in window patterns and roof forms over the entryway. And even though this one doesn't maybe show it, there is some variety of color there. Council saying maybe we need to kind of beef up the color differentiation, a bit more differentiation. Maybe there's some other things we can do that we haven't thought of to help kind of achieve that goal. So just a little bit of background in terms of how we regulate design in the community. It's a variety of different ways. We regulate through the master plan development phase, which one of the most recent ones are Sunset Meadows and Sister Woodlands. So there's an opportunity there to do some architectural review. We also have standards by zone, the residential, multifamily, residential zone, the North Sister Business Park, downtown commercial all have their own set of design standards. And then the commercial zones, we have on top of that the 1880s Western Design Unit standards and guidelines. And then we adopted townhome design standards recently that have to do with, not dictating architectural style, but basic good urban design by having, your entrance face the streets, having transparency of windows on the front facade, making sure it's just not all garage on narrow lots, that there's some ability for some of the home part to be visible from the street. So we do it a variety of different ways. And here's just an example that I pulled up the code for the master plan. It's similar to multifamily zone where for instance says if the continuous horizontal distance as measured from end wall to end wall of an individual facade of the multifamily structure is greater than 20 feet, the facade shall contain a minimum of 5 of the following features. And we give a whole menu list of different things that a designer can decide to employ to meet that. So that's you look through there. There's it's pretty specific in terms of what you can do to meet our requirements. But then we also have some provisions that are more subjective. And for example, in the master plan here, this is a provision that we use to try to work with the builder to try to get some variation in the units. It says master plan includes architectural features that complement and enhance positive characteristics of the site and surrounding area. Setbacks from street shall be staggered or buildings otherwise provided with architectural features that assure variety and interest along the street. Either, what would be your definition of staggering, enough staggering, or right? What architectural features would complement the characteristics of the site? Yours would be different. The point I think is that everybody has a different kind of understanding of what that means, and so it's difficult to administer. It's difficult for an applicant to know where the target is. But we use that the best that we could, and we had a developer that worked with us to try to get as much variety as we could out on some of these projects that have been built.
Seems like you're gonna do the most good with just allowing sort of individual preferences and color to kind of reign free. Like I said, you get variety as people choosing. Like when we talk about dormers and gables and we run into, we're just talking about those are a little bit of a fire risk. You have dormers and corners on. So all of these code sections intersect with each other or intersect with different values. I go to my HOA and I'm like, hey, I want to paint it a different color brown, they go, no, run.
Not the right collateral.
Yeah, you know. Don't put any solar panels on it because they're an eyesore. But the one every house will look the same, that's not nice.
Yeah.
An eyesore is not.
Where do you have? All black. Your choice, black or white.
I think we're talking about not choosing the colors, but saying if you're gonna use color as a way to differentiate the buildings, no matter how we write code.
Yeah.
Just so there has to be a. There's probably some terminology of color, enough shades different or whatever it is, if that's the tool you use.
It's inoffensive and let them do it. I don't know how you rate that.
Color is a really cheap tool to be able to differentiate.
But I'm creating an architectural piece.
I think in the mid 2015-ish, there was a run on gray and white. And there was a big discussion around where we were like trying to figure out a way like slow the roll on gray. And I think ultimately we just walked away and it went away on its own.
Yeah, I think that's what happens.
Yeah.
People get sick of seeing what they see and it's just something different.
Do you remember that, Aaron?
Want to hear from
The
there?
gray. Yeah.
What does the architect have to say?
I wanted to say that I think getting into the minutia of saying it has to be 5 shades different from building A, which the building one, or whatever maybe, is very strenuous on the designer, and I think part of it also comes back to architectural trends, but also the developer trends and preferences. There are a lot of people right now who like the sleek, modern look, and so having a lot of ins and outs and setbacks adds money because it adds material as well. So that's kind of a trade-off. Getting it really getting into the meticulousness of the code and being pretty restricted versus trying to like guide. Like I do that statement, I'm like, okay, there's a lot of play that I can have there, but if you have a minimum setback, like if we say 2 feet is enough, then it's a minimum 2 feet, but you could go 5 feet or 10 feet, right? If there's enough room to play, I would just caution with getting too specific.
Do you like the list, like, like that, or do you?
Well, and I think that's the other piece of that, depending on who the designer is,
Right,
they're gonna choose different pieces, right? Because some cost more than others. And it also depends on the developer and the client, so. You create guidelines, right? But I think it's gonna be hard to get too specific, and that's part of my issue with my HOA too. It's like, you only have 10 colors to choose from.
yeah. But we all get the intent, right? The intent is not to have a monoculture or a mono look of a bunch of things, because everyone's the sister list of sisters, right? That's what we're saying, to be clear.
Sisters enough.
Yes.
Sisters.
But
Keep
but
sisters
acknowledge
separate.
if you have prescriptive requirements for design or prescriptive colors or staggered, that alone is its own, that variety is its own repetition.
Mhm.
So it's how do you legislate it? And not get too prescriptive.
And a lot of the other thing that helps with variety is in the orientation of the building, because if you have one building that's just copied versus even rotating it, it helps create a different feel to the environment, and that allows for a different movement through these master plan spaces, so. Hard to. So.
Question, this might be specific to the state of Washington, but I know because my in-laws started moving to Washington, they're looking at like a big map, like development area, and they in Washington require to have like different builders, so there are 5 builders in one development. So I don't know how that could play into something like this, or like, oh, having multiple builders with different plans. And you're assigned like you get this many lots, that's the plan area.
Typically something that would be kind of developer like initiate like. The city would require that, and I don't know if the city could require that, but yeah, like Northwest Crossing is. I think that they allow certain builders and designers to design maximum of their homes in their community, with that variety.
And proximity to their other buildings.
Yeah,
But also, obviously, in our last developments, that hasn't been the case.
no, it's, I mean, they tend to be a little higher in custom home. and, you know, custom homes and that kind of scenario, which is great for they look great. The communities look great, there's a lot of variety, but it may not run to the affordability goals.
Maybe kind of thinking about, affordability and how next, moving forward, with bigger plots out.
They did do it up behind the industrial park in that corner, though, that guy, but yeah, Clearpine, they loosened that up to all kinds of builders. They, in fact, they just sold lots.
Yeah.
That's what, that worked well. There's
Yeah.
variety of
Yeah.
different. There's a few little cottages that
Yeah.
are similar, but
Yeah.
even on like
Yeah.
my in-law lives across the street and they made them do modern farmhouse,
Yeah.
even on the ones that look the same.
Yeah.
Same footprint, but different facades.
The problem is if you own the property and you're the developer, you're like, I'm not gonna give up all that money. I mean, it's just, that's how they make a living. So.
Surely there's other communities that have done this, right?
To require multiple movers.
No, not that. I just meant on a general basis, done this sort of planning exercise to help the non-mono looked up thing. That makes sense.
When you guys did the field trip to Sunset Meadows and, look down the street and stuff, I mean. Did you see that it matched kind of what we're wanting to do, the intent of our rules?
Or you get kind of like a super-
Well, yeah, then what I'm trying to accomplish is that, what we're trying to accomplish.
what we find ourselves. I think generally, I mean, I would kind of just relay what I heard from the council. It was interesting, the difference between like kind of driving through these things and like stopping, walking and talking and maybe hearing, background from staff on how we got to this. And we actually had the developer and over in Sunset Meadow or whether we had the architect with us. So they were able to kind of maybe give some, the other side, the other view of what the challenges are in designing. And after that, I think that they felt that there's some little things, tweaks that we could do. I mean, at first I thought it sounded like their concerns was we were gonna have to radically redesign the code here, to get to what they want to achieve, but on further reflection, I think it's more tweaks at this point than anything. That answer the question?
Yes. It's only 3 floor plans, or 3 buildings. And each street has one kind of building, the next street has another kind, and then the duplexes. And there's a little variety with an E here and that, but man, you look down that thing, it looks like a monopoly game, it's just everything looks the same. Yeah.
Well, that's what a lot of
Well, right, depending on when they built the first house or two, it was kind of, when it was built the first house or two, it was kind of exciting. But then, after it got 8 of them, then it kind of, changes, the repetitiveness is kind of.
I remember when we were looking at the project though, and we didn't have a lot of leeway in terms of saying. These every so many houses have to be different. I felt happy that we got walkways through the neighborhood so that you didn't have to walk a block and a half. To get around to the next street.
Well, part of the deal was to keep the distance away from 242, right? That was a big compromise.
Yeah.
That we wanted here.
Just recognize, but recognize the limitations to that code.
Right, that's, I guess what I'm saying, like, you kind of alluded to code as it exists, should we tweak that, minor tweaks to try to avoid that better.
The way I read this code provision, the only shall in there is that you shall stagger or have or architectural variety. So if you staggered your setbacks, it can be all the same road. So does that achieve the interest that the conversation we're having? Probably not.
Right, but see, they didn't even stagger, I mean,
Well, let us stagger because there are offsets. So there. Yeah. So if.
Just really much there and sign like having all single family homes and all townhomes, maybe like in terms of type of home, like, oh, you should have a mix of townhouse, like, mixed neighborhood. I was like, that, another one.
Or best practice, I wouldn't say it's a best practice, it really comes down to whatever the developer and the client wants to make their budget work. And so there's different ratios.
I feel like that's good for community building. I mean, you want different
Right, you want that one.
classes of people to mingle, or else we all get arguing your attitudes about how the other lives.
Yeah,
Just from a philosophical, like, society.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the great part is
Nothing but $1 million mansions, and you don't see anybody else in your life. What kind of life are you living?
I agree, yeah, and I think that comes back down to the people who are developing here, right? Because architects and designers are hired to like
Yeah.
build out their vision. And if their vision is all single family homes, then, and the code allows it, right? And they just can move forward, maybe we can create some guidelines which make them moving ahead, but like thinking about supporting more infill development and density in ways where the cottages may have more clusters and then they have bigger green spaces, right? And we're playing with all of those together that may encourage more diversity in housing types, but also more density, especially as we are going to be growing and we really don't have, we only have one way to grow, really, in the city. We're surrounded by.
So one problem with all this, I mean, this all sounds great, but it does not help the median income. Or the median housing costs at all. I mean, all that goes up with every time you tweak something.
That's the next item.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't help.
Good discussion.
Sounds like we have more feedback. You're ready.
Oh, yeah, I'll be ready.
And now you're.
I'll just quickly note that, on 4.3 down below, I don't know if you noticed that. Relative to the, the concern of being too prescriptive or whatever, not providing the ability for alternative designs. I think that one really does down there. Somebody came to us with something that they provided something different than all these things, but achieved the same goal.
Yeah, like we want Hobbit doors.
We can be open to that. What you say?
I said, yeah, we want Hobbit doors, so, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't speak for every designer and architect, but I come from a place of community based in like public interest design, so I may have more of that.
You're an expert, you're our expert, shush.
That is kind of what we're talking about, Julia, having that more of a community, exactly the way you describe what you do, is kind of what we're. I think want to achieve or hope to achieve.
That's the rule of government, right?
So it looks more like South Fur than Linda Street or one of the other ones, and that's what you got, that's kind of. That's kind of the goal to, like, in the whole part of town. I mean, those are like 40-foot wide lots, most of them are originally plotted that way.
I'm not saying that, because I think the high density is part of the answer for urban growth too, but trying to just make it. So it doesn't look.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna mention one. Builder or one, community, but it. I walk by that every day and.
In terms of the mix of unit types, so if you think about that, so it's like holistic, you've got the apartments. You've got townhomes, residences, basically, you got smaller single families, you got the bigger ones on like 142, so.
Oh, yeah, that's all good,
In some respects, that has achieved it.
Mixing things around the streets or whatever, like you mentioned, you have good event. So you look down the street, it doesn't all look the same.
So, kind of dropping some of those units kind of closer in proximity to each other, it makes them different work.
Yeah, if you're wanting to get a mix, and you're trying to keep things affordable, you can put some scattered cottage developments in. Next to some of these others, so you have more green space, for example. But those homes are definitely more affordable. Like, there's a neighborhood over here. It's like that.
One thing I noticed, and it's just because I spent some time in some of the units, my parents are making together out there, and something as subtle as window placement. I mean, you get units that are so close to each other, they can't keep their master bedroom blinds down because it'd be staring right into the room.
Other master bedroom.
Yeah, and same thing with the upstairs kind of bonus room. So some smart builders have, are able to offset the windows so you don't have that situation. And as we get smaller lots, that's kind of the trend. That's going to be more of an issue for livability and something that we maybe want to be conscious about in building door standards. So something bigger. Another thing we need to think about is complying with state law. And our code does not comply with state law with respect to clear and objective standards, which is a requirement that all local government may adopt and apply only clear and objective standards, conditions and procedures regulating development of housing, including needed housing, which is just if you saw the list that I included, it's just about any housing on that urban growth area. But to your point, also provides the ability for a alternative approval path. So our code needs to be clear and objective, and hopefully it's not results in homogeneous development. But it also can build into a discretionary process that if somebody comes in and says, "Hey, I don't want to go through I don't want to comply with those clear and objective standards because I don't like them. I want to try something different." It gives them the ability to be able to go through that process, but it also puts them in a stage where they might be subject to standards that are not totally clear. So it gives it's a two-track and review process. So, in your scenario, maybe that's something that if you came forward with something that was better and different, or something that wasn't addressed in code specifically, there's another graph for that in the tab. We'll just give some examples of our code, where it's not compliant with that law. This is our conditional use permit criteria, and granted, we don't have a whole lot of residential uses that are conditional use, but we do have two triplex uses that are allowed in a residential zone. That's going to change the efficiency measures for even more housing in the infill areas. So just an example of some of this criteria, the location, size, design, operating characteristics of the proposed use will be compatible with and will not have a significant adverse effect. Consideration shall be given with scale, blah, blah, blah. At this point, kind of bolded the pertinent wording in here. Desirable neighborhood characteristics. So it's just an example of how our code is has a lot of situations where
This looks like a lot of
subjective criteria.
what came into play with the gas station here. Yeah, that's almost exactly
Which
I remember too.
yeah.
which per state law, we wouldn't have done a violation because it's not needed housing. Maybe needed services, but that's not the law. So one of the outputs over there. Yeah, it's kind of how you take what the goal is and actually make some objective criteria. That'll be our challenge. One of the tools that you can use to do this and to identify all the areas on the code is to do a code audit. Basically, go through, scrub your code, find out where all these provisions are that are problematic. And so we have applied for a grant through the state to hopefully hire a consultant help with identifying, do that scrub, find what those edits are, and then provide some recommendations for recommended that you get through the amendment process. How are you guys doing on time? We can go till about 5. Got a few more items. So you just want to stay for a few more minutes.
I'm fine.
Another one of the goals, kind of goal was to monitor, reevaluate, and consider implementation of additional strategies in the housing plan and efficiency measures report. Efficiency measures was a process that we went through in 2022. It was kind of a step that needed to be done before we applied for a growth boundary rental, and that was just to see where our code could be amended to encourage more infill, to make sure that we were using our existing vacant lands and redevelopable lands in an efficient manner as possible. And through that process, the planning commission and council identified a bunch of different areas that we could make changes to help encourage more infill. to take a little bit of the stress and we may have often thought, studying that areas. So including increasing the minimum and maximum density allowances in our multifamily zone. We reduced the minimum lot sizes in the multifamily zone from 4,500 square feet down to 3,000. We added this, and we also reduced the lot sizes for duplex, triplex, and fourplexes. We created a density bonus system. If you provided affordable housing, you know, that use of extra units or reduced lot sizes. In two projects, maybe three projects that Habitat has done developments, two of them on large, probably sort of last, and then the one that we did at the Woodlands. Took advantage of that, reduced lot size. We didn't know necessarily that people would be applying to the cottage, minimum cottage lot size, which is already small to begin with, 2,000 square feet. But there's nothing in our code that would preclude it. So that meant taking lots, 20% of that, taking lots down to 1,600 square feet. Does that, pretty small, but Habitat's moving up to there, to get some workforce and for the government. So that's maybe something we want to maybe kind of circle back to and just make sure that Conservation Council is okay with that. And so it's specifically that's in code that doesn't allow for use. We added some housing units into our residential zone, triplexes and fourplexes, which weren't previously. I think it's only triplex. There was a lot in our zone. But the council said we're cool with that. Let's just add it in initial use. And then we created these overlay zones in the downtown commercial that would allow someone to just do residential only development, whereas previously everything had to be mixed use. And that we heard from feedback that was a obstacle to building residential. Because there's not as much commercial demand right now, it's more expensive to operate. And so we think some of that side of the downtown, specific downtown Cascade, Hood and Maine, but any area zone DC outside of those areas, we can do residential. That's just kind of a preview of kind of what we looked at. We also considered increasing a lot of building heights in the required zone in the downtown commercial. Specifically downtown commercial, maybe residential, where the current height limit is the downtown commercial 50 feet, but there is a provision in the code that says that top 15 feet cannot be residential. So 35 feet basically the highest point that you can do a residential with a downtown commercial. But you can build it as 50 feet, but that's more for the roof. That's rough. That could be you have an elevator, yes. So we considered that, and we went round and around. Ultimately, the council decided not to implement that build that controversial. There were some elements of fire equipment available to basically serve or fight fire in a situation to help rescue, not have a black truck to rescue people from 50 feet. So that was my concern. So we didn't go forward with that one. We also considered reduced parking requirements. We didn't do that at the time. So those are two things that maybe we could consider. I think the part of it is considering getting a electric park soon. And then other changes to consider once we went through this process, we reduced the lot size in those, but we did reduce the minimum lot widths. So the minimum lot widths are still what they used to be. So we can't really achieve that smaller lot size with the lot width. So we'll go back and revise that. There was some discussion at council as we put these back forward to council about 6 months to a year ago to say, hey, how do you guys think this is working? The discussion about the garage requirement came up. In downtown commercial, multifamily, and residential, it needs a one space garage is required with everything except for family, which is everything above 40 units. Is that a deterrent to infill housing, affordable housing requirement? Do we just leave that up to the developer to decide what they want to do? Or they'll provide a garage in the front board, or this no parking be required at all, or no garage parking required at all. So thoughts on that? I'll stop there. There might be some thoughts on wanting to revisit some of these things in the future. Any questions or thoughts on? These?
Really, it's not always that the building has some kind of requirements. I think we can get this. I think as we move forward, density and building up and not out is going to be really important. And also thinking about, I'm a little concerned about the downtown commercial allowing residential only use and not converting like bottom floor commercial mix and then like 3 and 4 stories with residential above. And just giving developers that encouraging to do that kind of development. And then, yeah, the height is really something that we need to keep talking about.
I think that downtown commercial is intended for, we have some land in the city that's really not downtown commercial, but zoned downtown commercial.
Like atmosphere.
Well, and yeah, even off of, you know, where the retirement.
Yeah, but
There's
we're
that big
gonna
building
connect
there.
to the UB expansion
Yeah,
could become,
it was down, yeah, it was downtown commercial, and you had to have downtown commercial combined with the residential.
yeah,
Now, yeah, but the reason was,
We definitely did some gerrymandering to make that downtown commercial.
There was a minimum or something you had to hit?
No, we just did some, we made that whole stretch right there downtown commercial. And I can't remember, but I remember it. It is kind of awkward, you're right.
but we changed it so that you could do residential, a couple years ago, I think.
yeah. But I think moving forward, the town's gonna double in size, so I'm assuming that the downtown commercial needs will also increase. So,
We don't go up, we're gonna go out.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking about how do we stay contiguous with the current commercial as we keep expanding in different directions. I'm nervous that what would happen is that gets developed, it's all residential, you know, from downtown commercial. And then pretty soon you have islands of downtown commercial that are not connected, and then you don't have a walkable downtown floor. So. I also am a little concerned about that.
Yeah, you think encourage people to get in their car and drive to. Yeah. Rocking around, what we're talking about.
I walk a lot, huh, so.
And here, I mean, here, so we're talking about, you know, like 3 blocks or something to walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I think if we're not careful and think about how the city is gonna grow and. If we just allow low density, single family homes, it's gonna get sprawled really quickly. So then pretty soon if you're like way out far, you know, it doesn't walk.
So just for clarity, you can't do city family. When I say residential, it's.
Has to be like an apartment, but like this moment, you know what I mean, like a 4-plex, or does that mean?
Yeah, well, over 40.
Over 4.
So
I agree with that part. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Need government discussion.
it doesn't. Satisfy what you're talking about. It doesn't mean you can't do mixed use. It just means that.
And then the way mixed use is defined in some areas. Is not like I've been complaining about the. The area out Barkley where it's mixed use, which is great, but the apartments have to be upstairs. So that anybody who has a hard time going upstairs and you got 70-year-old, 75-year-old, whatever. It's gonna be tough for them, you know, could be that instead of. But just above.
Yeah, some of the downstairs mixed use is a little bit. It's subject to, I mean, it's not really getting properly used, maybe.
Yeah.
Some of that stuff is very, well, there should be a storefront here, but there's nobody to rent it, so it's just my hallway upstairs.
Yeah.
I-
But I mean, I saw it, I had. It ended up passing away eventually, but it was older and again, really hard time going up and down the stairs. And saying, I don't think you really want this apartment, but.
It's because the greedy developer would put in an elevator.
I like it. I like it. You're right.
I think we can visit the off-street parking, the heights
And then also just build, but back to the type of the density bonuses, I think maybe we're looking at the density bonuses we get for those different levels of affordability, which maybe will bring advantages, but there are a lot more people who need affordable two-bedroom housing, and it's not all kind of one income bracket. It's kind of expanded to a much wider definition of affordable. So I think it may be helpful with that as well. But it comes back to the variety of housing and making sure that we're saying, and if we can get it down, we'll brochure from the post office. So nice.
The new section.
Sure.
It's important to the height, it's important and density that we keep our eyes on both of those. And infill, to make sure we're using our lands efficiently. This thing I heard quite a bit during the urban growth boundary discussion. Oh my God, urban sprawl, and everything, but that's what people's nature is. But if we're going up a little bit, making the density more denser, then. Yeah. Higher bill, this is.
Cool. Your thoughts before we have quickly.
More, can we do more bike paths to connect the PRT throughout town and get it? Their way at planning when it's.
Actually, we are putting a path from to the PRT itself down to Village Green Park.
Yeah, that's great.
How about a safe way to cross Cascade?
No, that's the that's
But I'm thinking ahead, I'm thinking to the new section of town especially and connecting, say you're a tourist, and you come and you rent a place in the new section of town and you're a mountain biker. Cool to have. We're known for this, right? It's always gonna be known. Would be very interesting for
when that have a pedestrian corridor
yeah,
that goes down north, south, south, north, getting across 20 and soon the bypass. I mean, we have to be able to get people safety across there.
there you go.
No, I just cut you down and then try to get across Cascade in the summer with bike. You get off your bike and you hold it and I have people yell at me. No, it's like, it doesn't matter because they think they have the right of way anyway. They don't even know that pedestrians have the right of way.
There's already pedestrian has right, but pedestrian, if it's a non-signal crossing, you can't impede the flow of traffic. It's state law. So jaywalking is illegal in Oregon as long as you're not impeding the flow of traffic.
I think there's opportunities within the growth area through the area planning process to make that a fundamental concept of design versus having to retrofit in the existing.
Totally. Back our way into it, I like it.
We'll call it the like, pathway. But just real quickly, and we'll get you out of here.
Yeah.
You're going the wrong way. Should we start in open?
Please.
So just let you know, one of the council goals was to study additional minor modifications in city short-term rental regulations. I don't sense that there's a real.
I only looked at that 5 times.
I shouldn't even put this out there. I don't think there's a real appetite amongst the majority of the council to open it up anytime soon.
Right, Daryl? We've gone through short-term rentals like a dozen times right now.
Excuse Matt shivers. Right?
Everyone's really cool and chill about that.
Yeah. I think it was mostly pinpointed or focused to the idea of owner operated, the ability for equipment owners actually living with their actual rent in their space and not be subject to the buffer requirements. But I don't sense that that's going to come through anytime soon. Then develop a process to monitor the effectiveness of code amendments. We haven't really figured out what that is, other than occasionally, after a year or two of administering it, bring it back to the planning commission or council and say, here's what the results have been. Here's what we've heard. And here's how many people are taking advantage of it. When it's smooth, it's not really smooth. Should we make tweaks? That I think is.
It'd be a good test case of the new tree code. And changing the penalty. See if that's really effective.
Will be effective.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you for bearing with us
Good
here.
job.
Any final thoughts, parting thoughts, things that was good feedback on the efficiency mechanism and that those things. Design it's good feedback. Maybe that's enough, but let us know if you have any other thoughts or things that you haven't talked about.
Think every time that you guys make our job easy. So thank you.
I'm missing the next meeting. It's the best meeting of the year.
21st.
Yeah, you know, I don't think missing a meeting in, well, today is my birthday. I was up right on the PCP and I even showered before I came. But, you know.
You're next to Daryl.
Oh, yeah, if I wasn't close, I might have. We didn't get to talk about any of that fun stuff, so I just thought that, yeah. What I read in the paper was,
It's like the EPP did a good job. So I would commend them and move forward with their recommendation. I know I don't get it, but
You can, what you can do is you could give us your written thoughts. So you want to share.
Cool.
I'll make sure we do.
awesome.
Yeah.
When are you sending out the
That's
packet?
what I did.
Well, possibly next Tuesday. It technically doesn't need to be sent out on Thursday or that next week. So you can start next week.
Awesome.
Anybody
Cool.
else?
I'll send some written thoughts.
Yeah. Awesome. And then just a quick update, we posted the associate planner. Emmy's position, we advertised it either as an assistant planner or as an associate planner. Assistant planner is kind of a true entry level position. Associate planner is the higher level. We kind of advertised it as both to see what kind of response we would get. And, we got about 140 applications.
whoa.
Vast majority of those were not qualified. But we have someone that was think we can work with, so we're still paring it down, and hope to do some interviews over the next, first round of interviews in a couple of weeks, kind of more about a virtual kind of pre-screening and bring some folks on site after that, and see what we get, and hope we can get that position filled. And we're all busy. We can see how much Penny was doing. And so it's following us. So we're managing it. We might not get right back to you on a phone call later, but we're managing it. And so Lucia and Carol did great. Lucia's been calling it as an intern. So we're managing, but we definitely want to get that position filled.
I can't believe it. There's somebody in the environment where I'm right now, there's still quite a bit of building developments. I don't know if you guys have seen the proposal yet for the right back in Sister's Coffee there, those 2 lots where the guy started with the rock garden, I think was first.
Have you seen that proposal?
No, but I heard through the grapevine. What's going on?
Yeah.
That's all you're gonna tell us?
Oh, jeez. It's a warehouse with apartments above and, yeah. Yeah. Plenty of stuff.
We're waiting on the application. We've heard if there's gonna be an application there at some point, they'll be understanding that, so.
Thought it was really cool that the metabolic maintenance place got filled and the
Yeah,
brewery by the same time.
Yeah,
That was amazing. Whoever did that should, I don't know if that was Stock Ground or if that was the economic development or.
well, they were right over in the science park.
I know.
I always drove by them.
Great.
Yeah.
I just
But
thought.
I didn't
that was
realize
so-
they were that big.
Right, me neither, but I love, I was worried about.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Oh. Fire protection? Yeah, the fire protection, that would have been paper.
Yeah, they provide, maybe provide additional context, what we provide in emergency response for the crews responding. So think fire camps, bathroom facilities, cooking facilities, residential facilities, so they're able to mobilize quickly to the different disaster response.
Right, we always think about wildfire, but they would go to hurricane relief, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way we're going, they're gonna have more and more business. With them.
And their headquarters are here, they have regional substations, they out south. But yeah. good to keep them.
Great
retained.
info, I thought.
And
Yeah.
Cool.
I think with some synergy with availability of Jenkins building and the vacancy. of
They said.
Rotary building. Yeah. It's a lot of coordination, economic development in Central Oregon, so to help. So
Street did a lot of it too, right? Street, yeah, I think he was a big part of that.
All right, thank you all. Have, see you there. Okay. Anything else?